Hey guys, so I'm going to do a really brief explanation of what you need to know as far as genetics and AP psychology. So you just really need to know the basics, understand DNA and chromosomes, you need to understand genes, and not really in depth, but you just need to know what they are. So I'm going to start by just explaining why it's important to psychology. So in psychology, we're wanting to understand the mind and people's behaviors. And when we're looking at why people act the way they do or why they think the way they do, a lot of times we come down to this basic question of, are they the way they are because they've inherited these traits, or are they the way they are because of their environment and society and culture? And a lot of times we say it's this complicated interaction between the two. But we do know for sure there are certain things that are inherited. And so that part of psychology is important. Things like intelligence, mental health, personality, and trying to find out of these aspects, what are we getting from our parents and what were we exposed to in the environment, and how does that, what is that interplay between the two? So we're going to talk about genetics, and we're going to start on the basic unit, and you just really need to know like what these units are. Okay, so in this picture you see a cell. So this could be any cell, this could be a neuron or any cell in the body, but the cells in their nucleus contain DNA. And so we're going to talk about what that is. So you can see in this picture we've brought down to the nucleus, and then if you move over you can see the chromosome. The chromosome has this almost like an X-like shape. And you have chromosomes, you have 46 of them. And you have, you get 23 from your mother and you get 23 from your father. And inside of these chromosomes are made up of tons and tons and tons of DNA strands. And so you can see that DNA strand right there. And the DNA strands, this is your genetic makeup. It's like your, it's written in, it's like a code of who you are, and all of your traits, and all of that is written into your DNA. It's thought that there is somewhere around 33.5 million DNA all packaged up into one chromosome. So that is a lot. But we're gonna like bring it out further. So I said that this is like the code for who you are and how your body has been created. It's the map. And so if we take all of maybe one trait, so maybe your trait is green eyes, you have that written into your chromosome. You have that written into your map that your eyes will be green. And so when we say one trait, one thing, we call that's a gene. So your green eyes was the gene, the trait that you have inherited. And the chromosomes that make up that is called a gene. But you have all kinds of things that make you you. You might have curly hair, you might have a certain, I don't know, the way you look. So all of the genes that you have that make you you create this complete map, and this big map of who you are, what makes you you, or even what makes you human. And that's called the genome, and that is the complete map of who you are. And so this is just a breakdown, just simply. DNA is the smallest part, and then we work our way up to a chromosome, to a gene, to a genome. Okay, so then there's an aspect that talks about twins, and it might kind of seem like this is a little displaced, but it's going to really come into effect later. In psychology, studying twins really helps us to understand if it is nature that is making someone the way they are, or if it is nurture, their environment. Because twins, if they're identical twins, they have the same genetic makeup, and so if there are similarities between the two, and especially if they're raised in different places, we could attribute that to their genetics. If they're raised in the same place, they're also going to have the same environment, so that can get tricky. But it's as close as you can possibly get to having the same person to see if something is genetics that's making them the way they are, or if it's their environment. So studying twins is really helpful for psychologists with nature and nurture. So you do need to know the difference between identical and fraternal. So identical twins, they have the same genes or the same genetic makeup because they come from the same egg. And that is called monozygotic, which a zygote is the egg. So monozygotic, they come from the same. So they are one in that sense. And so that one egg splits and becomes two people. So that they are mono, they started out as one, and the egg splits and they become two. So a fraternal twin, they're dizygotic, so that means two. There were two eggs present that were fertilized, and so they're two separate zygotes. They're dizygotic. They're two separate ones, and they're forming together in the same placenta. So they're forming together, but they didn't come from the same egg. So they will be similar because they had the same parents. They would be similar, and they're going to grow up in the same environment, but they're not going to have the same genetic material. So twins are really helpful in studying nature and nurture. Okay, so now we're going to talk about heritability and epigenetics. So heritability is just the extent to which we can say that a trait that you have, maybe it was your height or your intelligence, to what extent is that genetic? So intelligence is largely genetic. It has a high heritability. But there are aspects of your environment that can affect. So there are exposure to things that can affect the way that trait is. Maybe height, for example. So you may be a certain height because of genetics, but it can also be influenced by things in your environment. So to what extent is your trait genetic is heritability. Epigenetics is really interesting. Epigenetics is like going beyond your genes. So that is what it kind of means in epigenetic. So epigenetics is where you study a gene. So maybe your gene is we'll do I think the text talks about stress. So one of the examples they gave in the text was stress levels. And so you already have something written into your genetic code about how you respond to stress. But epigenetics says that you have on and off switches in your DNA that can trigger that trait to respond or to be blocked. So the example in the text was that they tested mother rats, and the mothers that licked and tended to the baby rats, it was as if they had an off switched on their stress gene that influenced their stress level, and they had less stress. And so the idea is that there must be something about the interaction with our environment and our genes. So maybe we can have that genetic code written in us, and it is there, but it has been turned on or turned off based on something in our environment. So you can see down here in this picture, we've got this little baby and we've got their DNA here, and the DNA is the same, but they went this route or they went this route. And it's as if these parts of their environment changed or turned on or turned off something that was already there but affected who they were. So it's kind of like taking this nature-nurture debate even farther by saying environment may actually have an effect on the genetic level, that it could have this blocking or turning off switch. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I hope it makes it a little bit more simple, some of the terms in genetics, but really what you need to know is just the basics. Can you define some of these terms and can you explain them? You don't really need to go very in depth, but if you just understand why genetics is important to psychology and you can explain that, I think you'll be good. If you can relate it back to this nature and nurture and how it is a complex interaction between your inherited traits, your genetics, and your environment. And so this is just the basis to how are those traits that you have inherited, how is that affecting you? Okay, I hope that's helpful.